Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the monthly RC chat. I am Minister Randy Griffin, and I am honored to be hosting tonight's session on mental health, what we're calling Missing Pieces tonight. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Many thanks to Dr. Carla Debnam, who is the Executive Director of the Renaissance Center. Dr. Carla, thank you so much for extending the invitation to join in tonight's talk on such an important topic as we are all on this journey to good mental health. This evening, we will focus on a topic that is still somewhat taboo among men, especially in the African American community. Although there has been an increase in the percentage of men who actually seek mental health support, the numbers still show that there is still a gap between men and women when it comes to seeking out mental health care. So tonight, we are going to dive into several aspects of mental health as it relates and pertains to men, their relationships, support systems, and simply taking steps to address their mental health needs. So if you know other brothers that need to hear this or that can participate in this discussion, please share the link with them now. It is not too late. This is a very important dialogue focused on men's mental health, and it does not get enough attention. So tonight, we're going to give it the attention that it deserves. So all are welcome. As we dive into tonight's discussion, I am honored to be joined by two highly respected professionals in the mental health field as we focus on men's mental health. And again, as I mentioned, what we're calling missing pieces. We are joined tonight by Dr. Kyle Berkley and also by Brandon Johnson. Both are experts in their field, and what a privilege it is to be sharing with them tonight, and we look forward to hearing their perspective. I know we are having some technical difficulties. We're waiting for one of our guests. So Brandon, we're going to start with you. If you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Absolutely. Just an honor to be here and to be sharing with you all tonight. I'm Brandon Johnson. I am really, so I wear two hats. And so on the personal level, I have a YouTube page called the Black Mental Wellness Lounge, where we have conversations like this one, where we talk about mental health and wellness for us. Like, what does it mean for us, like, to have these conversations, just as you talked about in the beginning. Randy, to really talk about, like, what does this mean for us, Black men, Black women, boys, girls, like what can we do to kind of improve our mental health? And so outside of that, my day job, I work as a branch chief in the federal government in the suicide prevention branch at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in an agency called SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. I'm not representing them tonight. I'm representing the Black Mental Wellness Lab. But I do a lot of work in suicide prevention, and I also lead and co-founded an initiative called the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative, where we work on these issues for Black youth and young adults. So really tapped into that work. And been a member of Morningstar. I guess I was 10, maybe, that we first started going on
Years
Morningstar.
ago. Just a
Yeah,
couple of years.
just a little bit ago, right? But yeah, so just honored to be a part of this, and just glad to go to a congregation in a church that centers mental health.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you tonight. We also now have with us Dr. Kyle Berkley, right on time. How are you, Dr. Berkley? Dr.
I'm
Kyle.
blessed. How you all doing this evening?
Really well. Could you introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your background?
My name is Dr. Kyle Berkley. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a member of the Renaissance Center. I work on the staff there, also work full-time, even though I don't serve in that capacity like Brandon mentioned earlier. At this very moment of what we're doing, I'm not representing, but I do work for the state of Maryland as a reentry coordinator for Patuxent Institution, and also work for Arundel County's crisis response.
Awesome. Nice to have you tonight. Both of you sound like you are extremely busy. So we are grateful that you were able to join us tonight. Obviously, with so much going on in the world, I have to say this is so timely of a conversation. There's so much going on. I think we all are under a lot of pressure just living day to day. But everything we see in the world, if it comes to politics, just the state of affairs of the world, it's just a lot to deal with. So this is really timely. So we're going to jump right in. For our viewers tonight, if you do have questions, please put those in the chat. We will try to answer as many of them as we can before we wrap up tonight. So we're going to start first really focusing on what we were looking at as a topic of this meeting, missing pieces. So I will pose this to both of you gentlemen, and either one of you can jump in and we can go from there. But tonight's focus is missing pieces. When you hear that term, missing pieces, what does that mean to you as it relates to men and their mental health?
Yeah, I can jump into it. I mean, I think really when we talk about missing pieces, I think there's like a bigger part of it, and then there's like a more like individualized part of it, right? So when we think about the bigger part of it, when we think about men and think about how we, what are the things that we think about in the day? What are the things that we prioritize? What are the things that um, we center, the things that are consistent in our lives? Usually it's making sure that we're employed, trying to ensure that we have money, because a lot of us have been taught like that's where you got to go, make sure you go where the money is.
Right.
And focusing on our physical health, right? Like those are kind of the things that come out first, right? And so there's this missing piece around mental health and wellness that just for a lot of us isn't there. So like it wasn't taught to us, it wasn't something that we have, focused on or centered in our lives. And so, we can, go for the money. We can have this grind culture where we're like, we always got to be doing something. We got to be like into something. But when it comes to mental health and wellness, they're missing pieces around, how do we communicate around our feelings and emotions? What do we do to take care of ourselves? Even beyond that, like, is it okay to take care of yourself? Like, is it, a masculine thing to take care of yourself or to understand your emotions and unpack, your emotions and things, where a lot of times we've been taught that it's not. So when we get to a certain point where we want to address our mental health, like we're behind. Like we don't have the tools and the things, the language, like the resources, the all those things that like help us in that sense. We don't have them because we haven't been taught them. We haven't been taught to prioritize them. They aren't things that come naturally to us, right? And so as a part of that, those things aren't there when we're processing things. And so I think for us as men, like they're missing pieces. Like mental health is a missing piece. And then when we decide to go in for our mental health, because we haven't been taught it and because we haven't spent a lot of time with our feelings, emotions, experiences, then we're kind of at a loss when it's that point for us to like engage around them.
That's spot on, because when I first saw this term, missing pieces, that's what hit me as well. It's like we focus on every other aspect of our lives, but for some reason we don't take care of the whole self. And to me, it's like the total wellness package. And your mental health is huge. It affects everything that we do. So that's really good. Dr. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
First, I wanted to add on to what Brandon said because he mentioned a lot. But when I think about missing pieces, I also think about emotions. A lot of us, I don't want to speak for every man, but I can speak for myself and a lot of men I've encountered. There's an emotional component that some kind of way either hasn't been addressed or has been addressed later on in life. And a lot of times it doesn't come out until you actually speak to a clinician or a counselor for whatever reason. I'm not sure what that reason is for. Also, finances. That also seems to be a missing piece when it comes to us as men, especially African American men.
Mhm.
Health, as we know, high blood pressure and other illnesses do happen to run pretty high in the African American demographic. Presentation, how do I look compared to the next man? And for whatever reason, we find ourselves wanting to keep up with the Joneses or the Johnsons in that aspect. Society, where's my place? Am I good enough? Have I done enough? Am I too late trying to do something?
Right.
Those
Right.
things happen to become missing pieces with us, and we don't even realize that we are enough, or we have a hard time accepting that we're enough.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because some people feel like if you show that vulnerability, if you show the emotion, then it's a sign of weakness, which is not. So hopefully, by the time we get through this session, a lot of men will understand that it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of you're not a strong man. It's just that we all need support. I mean, we all need support. So for men that are already hesitant, as you both have just described, to seek help, how do we begin focusing on pointing them in the right direction and addressing the areas that truly do impact their mental health? Dr. Cal, we'll start with you.
So I did a chat last week, and actually, no, that was on Fox 45, and this came up. and I always say the support system. Your support system should be the very first step. Of course, I'm always a big promoter of counseling and therapy, but
Right.
for whatever reason, that seems to come a lot later with a lot of our people. So a support system is important, and understanding who your support system is. A lot of times we could have support people around us who we think are our supporters,
Right.
but those people may not have our best interests at heart because
Mhm.
of their lack of understanding and knowledge. It's not a knock on them, it's not a ding on them, and it's not nothing about you, but sometimes people aren't who are in your circle may not give you the best advice.
Right.
They'll shake it off with some dirt on it. The approach doesn't help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadly, it doesn't. But what does help sometimes is when somebody says, hey, maybe you need some rest. Maybe you need to take off work for a couple of days. And finding those people who are emotionally and mentally mature enough to give you sound advice. Sometimes it comes from a partner. Sometimes it comes from a parent. Sometimes it comes from a cousin, uncle, aunt, co-worker, even a neighbor, somebody who actually takes the time to know you and learn you.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brandon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Kyle mentioned. Like I tell folks a lot, like it's good and it's helpful sometimes to listen to wise counsel, right? If somebody who knows you, someone who is like, connected to you can see signs or whatever. Because sometimes, if we're honest about it, we feel like we always have a handle on everything that's going on with us, right? Like we know ourselves to this point. Like nobody can tell me something about me that I don't know. Oftentimes it's those people closest to you that can give you those trends of like, no, like you haven't been yourself for a couple of weeks. This has been going on for a while. Like, you have been a little quick tempered and things like that. And naturally we get defensive as men. A lot of times we'll get defensive on that, but kind of taking those, that time to like do, that introspection of just like, is that the case? Like, is there something else going on? And, when you get to that point and feel like, you're ready to move into, seeking services or want to take care of your mental health, just have that conversation internally about like, what do you hope to gain from it? Because sometimes folks get into wanting to take care of their mental health as maintenance. It's just like going to the gym for physical health, right? Like you go to a therapist, you get a clinician, you get somebody that you can work with. And like over time, you're just like building that toolbox of like, I can take care of myself when these things come up, even though I don't feel too stressed right now. Or, it could be something in your past. You could have, just like this thing, that happened to me years ago keeps coming up. And I feel like it's getting in the way. Right. So it may be to address that particular thing. And it could just be something to better yourself overall. Like you've been hearing people talk about it, you're interested. You want to just, try it out. Like I just want to see what comes up for me. Right. And so figuring those pieces out, and then it'll kind of direct you where, you need to go or what resources are particularly helpful. And I know we'll talk about resources in the conversation, but then tapping in from there, getting connected to a Renaissance Center or something like that can help with therapy. And there are also other men's groups and support groups out there that can help if folks don't want to jump into like formalized therapy.
So Brandon, you touched on something that really stood out. And I want to see if we can focus on this a little bit. You mentioned as far as seeing therapists, a lot of people think there has to be something wrong. There's really something wrong. There's a big issue. But it doesn't always have to be that way. It could really just be a part of your routine, your wellness. Having someone to talk to that's not judgmental. They don't know all your business. Right. That you can be really open to them. So I want to stay there a little bit. Can you expand a little bit more on that as far as, really seeing somebody, just because it's part of your routine, it's part of your wellness, not because there's a condition or there's something in your history or there's something wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Brother Kyle can talk about this from the clinician side. So I'll tackle it from a person I've had a therapist. It was pre-pandemic, so I have to think about it. But it's been maybe 2016, 2017 that I've had a therapist. So I'm not a mental health clinician. I'm in the public health side of mental health. And so with that, I was like, I'm in this mental health space. I do all this work, and I want to practice what I preach. Like I want to, make sure like I'm taking care of myself. Like this space is tough. And so a lot of that was maintenance. It was just, I want to get in, make sure I have the tools and things to take care of yourself. And so, you're able to find a clinician that can do that. There are a number of resources to go to. One, I would point to the Renaissance Center for sure. There's also Psychology Today, where you can, really kind of, put together what you want from a therapist. If you're like, I think I would do better if I talked to a Black male, you can go on Psychology Today and you can filter for a Black male therapist. If you want to talk to a woman, if you want someone younger, older, someone you can see in person versus virtual, it gives you the ability to do that, to be able to put that, put those pieces together. And so from there, like you can go see a therapist and, just kind of start off with, conversations about what's happening in your day-to-day life. So as stressors come up, you can talk about them. And one thing I would say is that a lot of times when you get into therapy and you start, there's been times where I've been like, I don't got nothing to talk about this week. This week was fine. Like nothing happened. I don't have anything, to talk about. And you'll get on, you'll jump on, and then you'll start just dialoguing about things. And then something to come up that you didn't anticipate, or something that came up for you, or even like, all therapy sessions aren't talking about things that are harmful. Sometimes it's talking about how you recognize joy when you have it, how to maintain that joy, how to keep your peace. This week was peaceful. Why was it peaceful? What wasn't there that kept it peaceful?
Yeah.
Right. What did you do that helps you maintain it? And how do you keep it for as long as possible? And what do you do the next time that your peace is disrupted? Right. Like those things come up, and then you're like, man, I'm glad I went today. Like, I'm glad I went and talked. I didn't think I had nothing to talk about. So it gives you that space to just talk. And we talk a lot about like how, like you talked about in the beginning about like the pressures that we have, everybody, but like the pressures that Black men have. Right. And so having a safe space to, a non-judgmental space to just talk and vent and get those things out and articulate it, even when and it's good because you don't have to be perfect in therapy. You don't have to have all the things to say. That's why you're there, right? Sometimes you just talk and vent and it all comes out, and you're sometimes like, I didn't even know I even felt that way about it, but I also didn't have a space to talk about it, right? I didn't have the space to do that. So yes, you don't have to be in crisis. You don't have to feel that, something, disaster is going to happen to your mental health. You can go just for maintenance. So if you go to the gym, if you take your car to the shop, if you do all those preventative measures in other spaces, it's also okay and perfectly fine for us to do that for our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every therapy visit, for the people that are afraid of therapy, doesn't have to be a therapy visit of doom and gloom. There's a lot of good that can come out of a lot of good conversations. And I'll also plug Psychology Today. That's how I found the therapist that I was using.
Awesome.
And I can own that, and I can tell folks that are struggling with it. For years, I struggled with, I don't need a therapist. But the older you get and you realize there's things that you haven't dealt with or that you haven't talked about, those things will manifest in a different way, and sometimes it's in a way that's not healthy or not productive. So I did find one there, very good resource. Dr. Kyle, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maintenance is a very major thing that I think often gets overlooked. While Brandon was talking, I wrote down the old saying, don't let the hearse bring you to church. And it's interesting because in mental health, people can look at health, like regular physical health, like things like cancer, diabetes, as ways, okay, I'll see a doctor and my doctor will tell me, we'll do an examination, everything's fine on the initial visit. A couple visits go by, doctor monitors me, and all of a sudden notices that I have high blood pressure. Then all of a sudden I learned there's a history of high blood pressure in my family. Okay, I'm on high blood pressure medication. I'm learning what foods to eat. I'm taking care of myself. I'm monitoring my blood pressure. Things are getting better. I'm in a place of normalcy. Maintenance.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, in the mental health world, it's taboo. And it's always interesting to notice how taboo it is. And we don't really notice how big of an issue it is until something else happens.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, then the dominoes fall. And in those times, we find that there's something else that's deep inside that was triggered. I'll do some telling on myself. So back in 2018, I started counseling. And in that counseling, around the time my dad had died, my dad and I were very close. And when he died, there was a lot of things that started affecting my work. So my support system, they noticed that something was wrong, but at the same time, it was one of those things like, okay, he's going to get over it. He's going to tough it out. He's a man, men tough it out. Okay,
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
is a father of mine that's been there from day one that I idolized. You know, I wanted to be just like him. My dad was an ordained deacon, got ordained back in the early 80s. And my whole life, I wanted to be a deacon just like my dad. You know, I was at the
Right.
church up and everything, doing everything my dad did. And now all of a sudden, this person who I talk to every day, we watch every sporting event together, whether I'm at work or not, because he's going to call and he's going to force himself into that conversation, is not there anymore.
Yeah. Right.
So now the enormity of my life is gone.
Hmm.
So of course that impacts me. And then all of a sudden, your mind plays the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. And in that coulda, woulda, shoulda game, a little tiny little detail that is very real becomes a major detail, becomes a major issue. Now, my dad loved me. My dad bragged on me and everything. I never heard him say the words "I love you." I never heard him say the words "I'm proud of you." For whatever reason, those things triggered me and brought me to a place of depression,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and it impacted my work. And it couldn't have happened at a worse time, because at the time I was working at healthcare for the homeless. I was the lead therapist over there, and all these things were happening. I was a senior therapist on that team, I should say, and all these things are happening, and we're in the middle of an audit, and I can't hold it together. And the director had to go, "Hey, you need to take off for like a week or two."
Hmm.
In the middle of an audit, like my mental health was more important than that audit, which was a part of a major grant, which they could have lost.
Right.
But
Right.
I was in no way, shape, or form able to perform up to my capabilities because I wasn't taking care of my mental health.
Right.
And if it wasn't for a counseling center like the Renaissance Center, which it was actually the Renaissance Center, I would have. It probably could have gone from bad to worse, and it definitely helped me get even kill. I was back to get going back to work, performing at a high level, and eventually getting a promotion. And if it wasn't for that, I would have never received it. And a lot of times things come up, you know, not having that maintenance. I want to share this. So sometimes our brains can some kind of way turn off trauma.
Hmm.
And there was a trauma that happened to me as a child that I didn't even realize. And it just happened to come up one day. Like my mind just remembered this moment. And I was like, that explains so much about me that I didn't even remember. And that's one of the benefits of counseling and therapy, is addressing some things that we have buried inside of us that
Right.
impact our relationships, both relationships that we have with our spouses, girlfriends, fiancés, etc., or people who we work with, our neighbors, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah. I think everything, and number one, so sorry about your father passing, really my condolences to you. But everything you just mentioned, and a lot of things you were mentioning about your father that you didn't even notice, or things you didn't notice until he was gone, and there was things that were missing. It's just amazing how this comes full circle when we're talking about missing pieces to this whole equation. So it's just really interesting that you touched on that. You also mentioned on when you were young, as far as being a boy. One of the things I want to ask both of you is, when you look at depression and anxiety, how does it show up or present itself differently between us, men that are older and obviously younger boys? Does it present itself differently? Or if so, how? Brandon, you want to start?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Particularly, what comes out a lot, especially in our young boys, and I'll start there. A lot of the work that I do is with young people. um, is that really with our young boys, there's a lot of emotions that they are having a hard time handling, right? A lot of people, when you hear depression, folks think that, you just kind of withdraw and get isolated. You're not talking, you're not communicating. You're persistently sad. You can't get out of your own sadness, and all of those pieces like that. That definitely is there, especially for, like you said, for the older guys. Like, those things are there, and they're there in some young people as well. So a lot of this does cross over for sure. But I will point out, like in the work that we do, a lot of it with our young Black boys is really, sort of what we call externalizing behavior. So it's like not just those internalizing things. Sometimes it can come out through aggression. It can come out with not following directions. It can come out in reckless behavior and things like that. Like when young boys are experiencing hopelessness and worthlessness, like that comes with depression. So I did some work. So I told you I do a lot of work in suicide prevention. So around the time of the pandemic, I was reached out to from the city of Milwaukee, and so there were a lot of things happening in Milwaukee that they didn't realize was related to mental health. So around this time, there was like increases in, Black boys like not wanting to go to school, like not, signing on, like, there was a lot of virtual learning during that time. They also saw some increases in, reckless behavior around, engaging with law enforcement, and sometimes even too, they saw a major uptick in reckless driving, right? Like speeding, swerving in and out of lanes. Like there were increases in car accidents, and a lot of them were just Black boys. And they were just like, a lot of stuff was going on. And then they realized, they started, trying to do some work and trying to connect with it, going into schools and stuff like that, like talking to kids at schools. And what they realized was that there was a lot of hopelessness that had increased around that time. Like they were feeling like, we got all this stuff against us already, and now you put a pandemic on top of it. Now, like my supports, like Kyle was talking about, those social supports are gone. I'm not talking to like, my coach who was really helpful, my teacher who was really helpful. Like, I'm not able to go to church. I'm not able to get these things that were like supporting me and maintaining it. And so it came out in this reckless behavior where they didn't quite, things didn't matter as much because their ability to see the future had diminished a little bit. So definitely in our young boys, like those behaviors that, seem off, seem more, aggressive and seem, around that space, can sometimes be tapped into mental health and trauma. And a lot of times, it's important for us to know that, because, often society says like when Black boys are rebelling or like they're not following orders or doing those things that, it's related to all this other stuff, like, all these other stereotypes that we put on our Black boys. But a lot of times there aren't people around our young Black boys to say like, man, what's going on? Like, what's happening? Not just saying like, oh, I feel disrespected. You're not gonna talk to me like that. But like, what's going on, bro? This is not typically how, our relationship is, or how things go, or how I see you. Like what's going on? Everything all right? Like you good?
Right.
Those spaces are important, but that's what comes to mind, particularly with our young Black boys when it comes to mental health. And again, a lot of the other stuff still happens. The isolation and withdrawal and those things still do happen, but those are some things that we also notice with our Black boys.
And I think what you just said there on the end, as far as they don't have anybody to talk to because their father, didn't have anybody to talk to. So you look at it generationally, from generation to generation. We try to pass on the good things, but those are unfortunately some of the bad things that we also pass on, because we don't talk. We don't talk about our mental health. We don't talk about our problems. We don't talk about what's bothering us or what we need. So that's really important. Dr. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just adding to what Brandon said. Randy, earlier your question was about the connection. I'm going to paraphrase it basically, about that connection between an older generation and younger generation when it comes to it. And just kind of bring it to, there's a thing called transgenerational trauma, which can be trauma that's passed down from generation to generation. And we come from a people that has A, endured slavery, B, endured Jim Crow laws, C, has endured everything thereafter, the civil rights era, Rodney King, the O.J. Simpson situation, everything up to George Floyd, and thereafter more so. And in that, there's a lot of other pieces that impacts trauma that happens to older generations and younger generations.
Right.
Unemployment, empty nesting, which impacts us, isolation, drinking, smoking, sex, religiosity, lack of religion, music, social media, which impacts us a great deal, poverty,
Mm-hmm.
social media exposure also, like just a high exposure to trauma on social media. And there's so much of it: news, politics, not being heard, not even knowing what voice should be heard, and then a nostalgia to something. And a lot of times, this came out while I was writing a book, actually, and I didn't realize how this transgenerational trauma really impacted us while I was writing
Mm-hmm.
it. And I realized there's a certain nostalgia that's attached to music that brings us back to a certain point in our life that
Mm-hmm.
can also have us relive a trauma, or even a TV show that we may have loved as a child. We could watch and it brings us back to a certain mentality,
Right.
and that has an impact. And so imagine with us being older and having that wherewithal, how does that impact the younger generation? Like they're actually living through a certain moment in their life. There was a song that was out a couple years ago, "All My Friends Are Dead." There's a reason why that was a banger. When I wake up, I have murder on my mind. That's another song. There's a reason why young kids had loved and resonated to that song. And the question is why? Well, again, they're exposed to a lot of social media.
Yeah.
They may or may not have had that person in their social circle that have told them how to express that feeling in a very positive way. So then they give the audience to a negative sense,
Right. Right.
which can impact their well-being. You add that to a lot of other things such as substance abuse or sex. They're expressing themselves in unhealthy ways and unhealthy
Yeah.
habits, but they're still expressing themselves.
Right.
And I think the part that we, as our generation and older generations, should do, kind of like the Sankofa bird reaching back, is noticing those things and going,
Mm-hmm.
"Dude, I was in those shoes before. I got you."
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up social media because that is huge. Um, you know, for young people, for everyone, people are glued to social media these days, and a lot of people don't get their news from anywhere but social media, which is not news. But young people specifically, you hear about all the suicides and all of the things that happen, and just how people are impacted by social media, how they're influenced. So I want to give Brandon, if you don't mind, I want to give you a chance to speak on your thoughts on that. Since Dr. Kyle brought that up and kind of elaborated on it, I think it's an important topic to cover before we wrap up tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say social media is it's a mixed bag, right? So like there are definitely some positives and negatives on both sides of social media. So social media provides folks with a place of connection. It provides them an ability to to make new friends, to keep up with people that they know. It gives people entertainment. It gives people all of those things. But what it also gives you is a lot of stuff, right? It gives you a lot of things to absorb. And unless you're really, really good with curating your timeline and getting that good algorithm right where you want it, a lot of times you're exposed to things that you don't necessarily need, that you don't necessarily want. It's overstimulating. It's just a constant bombardment of things, right? And so for our young people, they're exposed to a lot of stuff things that they can't process, or things that there's not anybody else with them at the time when they see it to help them process it, right? And so they have to interpret it. You can get millions of people's different worldviews about the same topic in an instant. And then that's not including, um, cyberbullying and things of that nature. Like, um, it's definitely really like a tough thing to navigate without, nobody gets a manual for like, this is how you deal with social media, right? Like, this is how you navigate these spaces. Like, there's none of that. It's just, you kind of get it one day, you're on it, and you're inundated with it. And so, the other thing I'm going to put out with that is that it's not just a young people problem.
Right.
There are plenty of adults, a ton of adults who are addicted. I would say, how many of us, you wake up, your alarm goes off, your alarm a lot of times now are on your phone. So
Right.
the next thing you do is you turn that alarm off because you're mad
You
it's time to get
scroll.
up. Then you start
Right.
scrolling. And
Yeah.
then you start scrolling. And so, before you even get a chance to figure out anything, you haven't a chance to get up, get yourself together, you haven't prayed yet. You just up, and there's information.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I tell folks to, definitely monitor how you're feeling on social media. Like when you're on social media, is it giving you, what you need? Is it helping you in any way? If you're feeling like it's becoming something that's a hindrance, limit your time on. A lot of our phones actually have uh, downtime apps or things like that that can actually tell you like, hey, this is your limit for the day on, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all those kind of things. But, and figure out, you can, put a ton of positive things like that on your social media pieces as well to try to get good information, things that can help. All of those things can be things that can really help and support you. So it depends really on how you use social media, and monitor how your kids are using social
Right.
media as much as you can. If there are limits and things to put on that, our young people are exposed to things now, way more things now than it was when we were growing up, and they have complete access to it. Once you give a young person a phone, you can forget it. And, I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. They're not on social media yet, but I can tell you they're smarter than us. They can work the phones. They can figure out how to get access to things. So just make sure you're monitoring, what your young people are looking at, and monitor how you feel about it. Monitor how it's making you feel. And if you need to disconnect from it, definitely try to do that as much as possible, so you're not inundating your mind with things that are damaging your mental health.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. I want to give Dr. Kyle a minute because we have a little time. So I want to delve into this. And this is going to seem like it's off topic, but it's really not. We have the election coming up in November. And I think we could all agree it's a critical point we're at as far as, who gets in the White House, who controls the government. Dr. Kyle, can you talk about that from just a historical perspective as far as the election? Why are there so many people? Because we hear a lot, especially a lot of Black men saying they're not going to vote. They're not going to vote, even though they know scores of people died so that we could have that right. How is that tied to mental health, and how can we get ahead of it?
Well, it's tied to mental health. Again, going back to what I said earlier, the transgenerational trauma piece as well. And I could tie it together with what Brandon was just talking about with the social media.
Yeah.
We, believe it or not, Brandon and I, and you come from a generation where when we would go to the supermarket, we would interact with somebody at the register, right? Now we live in a world where now you just self-checkout. People don't even want to talk to people. If you go to the supermarket, how many people you see with headphones or earbuds in their ear?
And they're on their phone.
Yeah, they're on their phone.
Yeah.
Like there was one point in time you'd be like, hey man, this is crazy. The price is going up, on something like bread. And this is years ago. And that would cause a whole discussion, and people would it wasn't a barrier when it came to something like politics or anything like that, where you could talk about, hey, this is the reason why, or we had this war going on over here, which may have caused this uptick because of the price of oil. Now we live in a world where everybody's so divided, everybody's so walking on eggshells, everybody's so spread apart, and we have the whole world at our fingertips with our cell phones. Now, there was a point in time, and everybody's heard this. Hey, how do you spell this? Look it up, right? You would pick up a dictionary, you would go through, and you would figure out how to spell it. And subconsciously, you're picking up a lot of other words as well, which is great, and it's learning.
Right.
Same thing with going to the library, reading the newspaper, you'll figure out what's going on in the world. Well, now we have the whole world at our fingertips with these devices. And with these devices having the whole world, you're getting positive information and negative information. And sometimes what gets your attention may be negative or false, and because it's not filtered. And some of these sources, some of it can be left-leaning, some of it could be right-leaning, some of it could just be hoopla.
Right.
Nothing to do with nothing, but it just is entertaining, and some of us don't even realize it's just entertainment. And how does that impact the election, you may ask? Well, if you're entertained by this and it has your attention, then you're starting to look at your real world and your real world view and go, well, this is because of this. Even though some of it may be factual and some of it may not, you now have a negative view on something that could be a positive in your life, and you're like, nah, I'm not voting. Or you could walk outside, look up the street, see several vacant houses to your left, see several vacant houses to your right, your next door neighbor, speaking from experience, could
Mhm.
have an addiction to something, has always had an addiction, no matter how many presidents were in office, and you feel like, hey, look, my vote don't matter because I'm seeing the same thing over and over
Mhm.
repetitively, and it's not being addressed. So now I feel isolated. Again, going back to what I said at the supermarket, people with the headphones and isolating themselves from the world, and you see your constant everything. And there was a saying. I do not remember who said the saying. If any of y'all remember, please say it. But a vote not cast is because of a voice not heard.
Mhm. Mhm.
You've heard that before.
I've heard that. Yeah.
That's what we're seeing a lot with this 18 to 35 demographic, and that's the demographic that both parties want to go after, and have failed with flying colors. Sadly,
Yeah.
and it's
Great,
been an
Griffin.
ongoing thing for decades now, and it's because voice is not heard. And once
Yeah.
again, bringing it right back to this chat, those voices not heard are for multiple reasons. And a lot of times we can talk about those things in counseling because
Yeah.
one thing does impact the other. Like they're not two separate things. It's not a no because it's a yes and.
Mhm. Mhm. Very interesting points because, when you look at the election, like I said, some people may say, well, what does it have to do with it? But that's a huge missing piece. If there are people that feel like their vote doesn't matter because of whatever the generational trauma is or history, that has lasting effects and it manifests in a different way where you're not, voting or exercising that right. Look at how that impacts the future. So that's really big. I know we're coming up near the end of our session. This time is flying. Good conversation, though. I would like to close out just with the last question here. I'm going to plug Morning Star a bit, my church, my wonderful pastor, and great
Absolutely.
church. But our men's ministry does a lot of focus on men's activities, building relationships. We have the man chat, man talk, all those things. I want to hear from both of you. What are some of the other ways to foster healthy relationships, with other men? Even if it's not going to therapy, but therapy for sure. But if it's just developing those strong relationships with other men where you can share your experiences and just have a source to vent, what are some of those things that they could do that? Brandon, would you like to start?
I'll pass it to Kyle first.
Okay. All right.
Well, let me brag about my bishop for a little bit. Because this is a person with very great insight and wherewithal. And
Yeah.
like Bishop is an on-time pastor. I could tell you that all day long.
Absolutely.
Bishop, he's a visionary.
Yes.
So things like the prayer breakfast that we've had, where we've had these brunches, where we could just come together, have these barbershop talks, and even though there's a structure to it, it's a loose structure where we all can bond, get to know each other,
Mhm.
and know I'm higher than you. We're all on the same playing field, and
Right.
everybody has a voice and everybody listens. Things like what's going on now with what they're trying to do with the golfing, which is great, and I enjoyed myself. I don't know if anybody's been going to the. I know I saw you on Sunday, Brandon, when we was all back there playing the putt thing, and it was great because did you see how many men was coming by and just having random conversations? Not everybody participated in golf, but it was great just having that conversation, and we weren't so. We were smiling.
Right.
We were having fun. It was like, okay, we could take those barriers and limits off. That means a lot because Bishop has created an atmosphere with men of all kind of areas, whether we come from Westport, whether we come from East Baltimore, West Baltimore, Delaware, all over can come together, whether we come from very wealthy families or very impoverished families, we all can come together and talk to each other. And we could talk about job fairs, and Bishop has had the wherewithal to do that, which is amazing. We have the food bank, which is amazing. There's so many other things. I'm going to miss out on the baby showers, like all these great things that supports families and support men's well-being and men's mental health, and without even having the word mental health attached to it. But it also creates a better social network. I mentioned this in a Bible study before, not about the men's talk that we have on Tuesdays. I mentioned this before. Two of the people I met, three of the first people I met when I first joined this church were Carnell, Dr. Brown, and I'm blanking on his name now. Minister. I'm thinking of his name, and I don't want to disclose something.
There's a lot of them.
Their smiles, the way how they smiled, and the way how they welcomed you in, it was like there was no bravado about it. It was just like, no, we're glad to have you here, and that meant a lot.
Right.
And
it goes a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes a long way. So it made me excited to come back to MSBC every Sunday. It made me want to be a part of the men's Bible study. It made me want to join discipleship. I enjoyed discipleship. I was able to bond with the people in there. So I was able to create a positive social network. It's very easy to have a negative one, especially if you come from certain backgrounds.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes people think it takes a lot, but sometimes it could be just a hello, just a how are you? Because some people don't hear that. Nobody asks some people, well, how are you doing? Or how was your week? And sometimes you're just like, wow, somebody actually cares, with what's going on with me. So that's really good. Brandon, did you have any thoughts?
Mr. Steve was the person's name I was trying to remember. Minister Steve.
Yes.
Yeah.
His name. But yeah, like it meant a lot.
Yes, he's awesome. He is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shout out to all of them. Yeah, I definitely echo all that. Like I said in the beginning, it's great to go to a church where mental health is centered. And it's especially for men. And so with brothers, when I, talk about like what we can do to kind of like foster these conversations and things, I think the important thing is to just talk, right? Like a lot of brothers, it's interesting, and I share this often, that with brothers, when we get together, like we can get together for any reason, just to go hang out, just to go to a sporting event, like anything like that, or hang out at somebody's house. The interesting thing about us is that what will happen is that we can all be in the room suffering from the same thing, dealing with the same stuff, like struggles with money, struggles with spouses, struggles with those hard-headed kids we all got, like all those kind of things, like in the same space, and nobody feels comfortable talking about it. Nobody, people don't feel comfortable just having those conversations, but we will surface level of conversation in a relationship for forever, right? Like we'll have guys, that we're like, we've been cool for a long time, and you be like, yeah, like, how many kids they got, and they may be like, I don't know, it never came up, like those kind of things, right? And I actually saw a comedian do a bit about that, where like, he went on a golfing trip with one of his buddies who, recently got divorced, and his wife came back and was like, hey, you went with him, how's he doing? And the guy was like, I don't know. And he was like, oh, is he dating somebody else? He was like, I don't know. She was like, you were with him for 4 hours. What did you talk about? And he was like, golf. Right. And it's just like gets there. But sometimes like having those conversations and being sometimes the first person in your friend group and your family to kind of say like, hey man, like, I'm dealing with something, like, can we find time to chat? Like, I just want to do this. It really kind of breaks down that barrier that you have, and it could also break down the barrier of the person you're talking to, because now they know, oh, it's okay for us to talk about this. It's so okay to bring this up. Like other people are dealing with this. I think is really, a good thing to do, and really can help build those relationships. And the other thing I do, and Kyle and I both demonstrated this tonight. And first of all, Kyle and I talk, like we'll talk, and we can talk about this stuff. Like when we see each other, we start getting on these topics and stuff for a long time. That's my good brother. But like we can get to a space where we're like, yeah, this was my mental health journey. This was what this was. We both talked about, Kyle sharing, being vulnerable, talking about his things. I'm sharing like, I've been in therapy this long. This is what it does for me. Like, if you do go into that route and it does something for you, like, don't be ashamed to share that piece, right? Like, then it helps somebody else go like, maybe I'll try it. And again, maybe a bunch of people won't, but you never know who needs to hear and see someone who looks like them saying that I was not my best self. I was broken in this season, and this is what helped me get to the other side of it. And sometimes people need to see another side. Yeah. Sometimes people need to see someone on the other side, and someone to say, I have my days. There are weeks when I'm not great. There are seasons when I still go through it, but I'm still going. And I have these things that help me and support it. So I think, doing those things, being vulnerable, being open as men, especially Black men, like you can really change lives with the people around you, whether you know it or not.
I think what you touched on is some people miss the fact that you sharing something sometimes is not for you.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just being vulnerable or being transparent rather and sharing something with a friend or someone else, it helps them. And you just never know what crossroads they're in, what they're dealing with. And that one, level of transparency that you share with them could just change the course of their life or could change the course of what they're going through. So that's really, really critical. So we are near the end. I want to give you both a chance, just a quick summary. Anything else you want to share just to close us out, Brandon?
Yeah. So real quick, I would definitely say, I mentioned psychology today. I'll also mention therapy for Black men. If you go and Google therapy for Black men, it's an online resource that curates therapists and things across the country that work with Black men. They do other resources and stuff like that as well. So I'll plug them. I'll also plug 988. That's the 3-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And like we talked about earlier, you do not need to be in a suicidal crisis to use 988. It's call, chat, or text. You can go to their website. They have a chat function where if you want to text it on your phone, you can text 988 and you'll get connected to a person on the other end, trained crisis counselor that's able to help you. So just wanted to plug those resources there, and just the Black Mental Wellness Lounge is on YouTube. So if you look up Black Mental Wellness Lounge, you'll see that there. But just wanted to plug those additional resources, and I appreciate the conversation with you, brother.
Awesome.
Today.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Kyle.
I want to plug the Renaissance Center, of course. Your local crisis response team, just because a lot of us go to different things at different times and it changes. And your local crisis response team has resources to get us back to a good baseline. SAMHSA, of course. Also reaching out to your local substance abuse agency. And sometimes reaching out to your case manager at where you receive your medical care can help, because a lot of us, we self-medicate. Not everybody does, but a lot of people do. And that's how they deal with their mental health, rather knowing or not knowing. That's how they deal with trauma, both knowing and not knowing. So acknowledging that elephant in the room and talking to your case manager or talking to your doctor and getting a referral to get help. Even if it's maintenance, if you're not at that place where you're ready to quit, but you just want to get to a place where you can maintain in a healthy way, I'm all for harm reduction. Talking to your doctor about it, or talking to a case manager or whoever's in your support system to get that help.
Well, like I said, I know we're at the end. This has been a great conversation. You both are like a wealth of knowledge. I feel like we could do a part 2. This was really, really good. So I just want to thank you both for sharing your expertise, sharing your perspective. Prayerfully, hopefully someone tonight was touched by this. They got some information they can use, they can receive. As you've heard, there's a lot of great resources out there. Use them. They are available. As we've heard tonight, mental health is really part of the total package. It's total wellness. So there's no shame in raising your hand and saying, I need somebody to talk to, or I need some help. So we're just really grateful that both of you carved out time tonight. Again, very healthy discussion. Appreciate it. After anyone who's viewing this, and you don't have to be a man to do this, but anybody that needs some support or needs help, as both Kyle and Brandon have mentioned, there are resources available. You can reach out to the Renaissance Center at 410-409-0025, or also via the website at therenaissancecenter.org. So again, thank you all for joining us, all of our viewers. Hopefully you walk away with some good information tonight. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great evening and be blessed.